to focus on few specific instances of strategy formulation. The first one that we are going to look at will be the strategic imperatives for marketing in a new or growing market. So, you would recall the two fundamental concepts that we have introduced earlier. One is what is new. So, you would recall that we had talked about that the newness can be thought of in terms of this simple matrix, where we can talk about existing product, new product, an existing market and a new market, existing market, new market. So, this is where we normally operate, that means an existing set of products and we are offering that to an existing market. So, when we talk about a new market, it could be an existing product in a new market, or it could be a new product in a new market. We have already discussed before that usually when we talk about new market, we think in terms of this, but this is the market of highest risk, because the customer is relatively unknown, the product is relatively unknown, and therefore, that has the highest level of uncertainty. Most of the time we are either looking at a new product in a new market, existing market, or an existing product in a new market. So, these are the kind of dimensions of when we talk about a new market. We will now in this session look into these concepts in a little bit more depth to understand how marketing strategy can be fine tuned in particular cases, and we will discuss some well known examples as well. The other fundamental concept which we must remember is with respect to market growth, and we know that the market growth can be of this type, which we usually call the S curve, where we know that the market, the activities actually start much earlier, because you have to do the product development. As you know, this is time and this is either cumulative sales, or it could be cumulative revenue, or cumulative number of units sold, or any one of those factors which fundamentally shows how the business is growing. And this is a stage where we have no revenue, and therefore, this is before the business activities start. So, usually we know that this is actually the stage where we have the so called innovative adopters and early adopters. And we have also often discussed before that at this stage we are looking at, actually that same graph can be thought of in this fashion. In that case, this early part can be divided into two parts, and we know that the innovative adopters are about 2.5% of the total population, and the early adopters are about 13.5%. So, we know that these two together can represent about 16%. We also know that after this stage of so called early adopters, to reach the next stage, which is the creamy stage, the early majority, which usually represents about 34% of the total revenue or cumulative product sold, etc., and actually normally delivers the highest level of margin or revenue. And this late majority, which is about another 34%. So, we know that to reach this 68% of the total possible or usual distribution, it is not this graph does not automatically transit here. We have discussed before that there is a chasm that develops, and to cross that chasm we need to do some we have to take some strategic steps. Today, of course, we are looking at the strategies at this stage. That means, when it is if it is an new product in a new market, we often call it new to the world. So, actually, as you can see here, the newness can be also divided in two parts. That means, new to the company and new to the market, and this could be a known market. So, therefore, new to the world and new to the company is a dimension of the highest uncertainty, or it could be an additions, improvements on current product. So, in a way it is kind of and it could be an existing product being taken to a new market with some tweaking in it. So, as you know that, for example, Microsoft has taken their software and bundled it into a box, which earlier was actually being bundled in a box like a PC. Now, it is being bundled in another kind of computer, and which becomes therefore a gaming box. So, it is a game computer bundled with some software, and it creates a successful product, Xbox, and so on. So, this is actually some new addition, improvement on a current product set. By that, actually we are able to reposition. Now, this repositioning can also be done by adding or deleting features, as we are seeing it in the mobile phone market. So, you can add features like a camera, you can add various kinds of other smart features and create a new category called smartphone, which actually goes to the same market, but to the upper end. So, it actually attracts the business users, the professional users, the mobile professionals. On the other hand, you can actually take away number of features from the usual dimension of mobile phone, and you can create a very simple phone suitable for rural users who would mainly be using it for talking and not that much of even sending text, but they may be interested in music. They may be interested to have a torch attached to their phone. So, you add those little features and take out some of the major features and manage the cost profile, and therefore, you can actually create a new price position in the marketplace. So, these are various degrees of newness. So, the newness can be in terms of therefore, in the new to the company, it could be as well as new to the marketplace. So, then it becomes really new type of combination, or it could be an existing product where you add or delete features and create a new position. So, these are the different dimensions, and according to that, according to which the marketing strategies will obviously change. Now, we often talk about the so called first movers advantage where we talk about this new market, or whenever we talk about this creating the new position. And whenever we talk about the first mover, we always think about the people like Apple, which was the first in the market space for personal computers, and there are so many other examples that we think about. But remember that the first mover has some inherent competitive advantages, because they can choose the market segment or the market position where they want to operate. So, when Motorola first introduced mobile phone. So, they looked at the category of mobile professionals like the policemen, like the high end business executives, or certain professionals who were on the move like the service technicians and so on, and accordingly they created their product. So, at that time it was not really like this small sleek lightweight mobile phone which we can today put it in our pocket. It was like a big brick, and but it created a market position where it was okay for those people to carry this couple of kilograms of weight around, just because they were able to have this mobile communication. So, army personnel, police personnel, mobile technicians, and executives on the move, they accept it. Just as the original, the so called today we call that notebook, but at some point of time it was called laptop, and it was actually kind of quite heavy to put it on your lap. You actually had to put it on a table, but yet it was actually a mobile computing machine. So, the people who were pioneers in these fields like the mobile phone or the mobile computer, or a small tractor, or the very small compact cars, etc., as a first mover in that category, they were able to create a market segment. So, when Maruti 800 was introduced in India, it could actually it was the first compact car at that price point in that marketplace, and they kind of equated themselves with the young upwardly mobile professionals, and they were the first car for an engineer or a doctor. So, it kind of created a position which was synchronized with aspiration of a young upwardly mobile person. So, the first mover in that way can define the rules of the game. So, these are the good points. They can have choice of channels. Before Maruti, we had this the two older car makers who operated in relative security of licenses and quotas and so on, and they did not have very many channels. They were not very interested in developing a wide network of channels, because whatever they produced got sold. So, it was like a seller's market. People were waiting to get a car. All that changed when Maruti, as a first mover, created a mass market for cars, these compact cars, for a kind of professional who were then just coming up in the Indian marketplace, because Maruti's growth happened around the same time when this the software industry growth and various other new, so called new to the country type of industries, knowledge based industries were growing, and therefore, it created a wide network of channels, because it had to assure these professional, because these were people who were driving the car by themselves. So, it was a self driven car as opposed to a driver driven car, which was most often the case with earlier models like Ambassador or Fiat. And so, these people wanted to be assured that they will not be stranded if the car develops some trouble. So, the channels were developed, the supply chain was developed by Maruti, and that created an advantage which even today they are using as a competitive advantage. So, in many cases these channels or major distributors were locked in by the first mover, in this case Maruti, and therefore, these major service providers, major distributors became a kind of a competitive barrier for the people who then came later on and tried to challenge Maruti, many car makers, international car makers who then joined the fray, or even Indian car makers who later on came up. So, to create the kind of channel Maruti had at that time, almost a 8-10 years lead, it was not very easy for the new entrants to really penetrate that competitive barrier. And of course, when this boom took place, when this high rapid growth of demand came up for the small compact cars, Maruti was able to create that economy of scale and as well as experience, which keeps them in a leading position even today. But of course, it is not always easy to retain these advantages, because in many other cases a chaser or a follower can actually take advantage of the first movers market creation and yet attack the market leader in areas where they are most vulnerable. They can actually look at mistakes or customer dissatisfaction points and can do improvements which immediately appeal to the customer, or they can actually focus on first movers constraints. The first mover often has already incurred a high R&D cost, and therefore they have constant need of risk capital, venture capital. They need equity participation because debt becomes very expensive at that stage, and there is a constant cash flow problem, and these are areas which can be sort of capitalized by a new mover who takes care of these factors, because they may be actually coming up with a follow up product. So, therefore, they are doing incremental improvements. So, their fundamental their expenses on fundamental R&D or lead R&D or pioneering R&D may be eliminated, because they are basically creating a product which is taking care of some of the technological or operational mistakes of the first mover, and as a result they may also be able to create a better position with respect to the risk capital and so on. So, these are therefore, the first mover or as we call the leading edge competitor can actually be on a bleeding edge because of these financial constraints that often haunt the first mover. So, the first mover, however, has options which will take care of these possible problems with respect to risk capital or cash flow problem. So, many times we see that the first mover actually start with a slice of the market, a focus strategy which we have discussed before. That means, they take a niche market penetration strategy. But this is not always feasible to take a niche market position. You may actually, even as a first mover, may have to take a mass market penetration. That means, all out the bang or bust type of strategy, because your market may demand it. We will see some examples. And there is a third alternative, which is you get into a market, enjoy the market when it is giving you the best level of revenue and return, and then withdraw from that market. Again, this is not always feasible, but is sometimes feasible, and we can, in each case we can see that what are the alternatives. So, in the mass market penetration strategy, obviously we have to create as quickly as possible a commanding share of the total market, and therefore, you have to have a blitzkrieg. We have to have a storming strategy into the marketplace. You have to be able to do saturation distribution. You have to have really the volume which you can pump into the market if the customer interest is rising. So, you can look at the strategy that was followed by Apple when they launched the iPod, or later on the iPhone, or later on the iPad. They continued to do this mass market penetration, but of course, when they came up with iPhone or they came up with iPad, they were able to leverage the market base which they had already stormed into earlier with their iPod product. So, they were actually able to create a mass market which was far beyond their original niche market position of high end computers or high end portable machines, and they have come up with a market which needed to amortize their investment and to make money. They needed to sell at a speed which possibly was 1,000 times more than the speed at which they were selling their desktops or notebooks before that. So, these entry barriers that at that time iPod created by rapid introduction of, if you remember, they were quite rapid in introducing 3-4 variants. They quickly, so they came up with one model, they quickly introduced smaller models, they quickly introduced more sophisticated models, and they created a whole range to cover the almost entire market space, and created entry barriers which then was not very easy for. In fact, I would say that the iPod before it kind of got absorbed, this independent portable music devices using solid state, backed up by the fantastic service which they got from iTunes, that combination today is absorbed in the so called smartphone, music phone or high end phone market. So, possibly there are not very many buyers of just that portable music format. It has kind of got diffused into the new machines which they have introduced. So, as you are seeing that this is exactly the strategy we discussed a little while back, that you introduce a new to the company, new to the market product, and then you actually keep on harvesting on that by adding features, deleting features, blending into it in the other dimensions, and therefore, you expand the market. So, if you have like Apple unique competencies and resources, and you have to deliver, you are able to execute that strategy, then of course, this mass market penetration, even though it is expensive, even though it is risky, can be a very, very winning strategy. The niche penetration, on the other hand, can help entrepreneurial first movers, because this niche penetration strategy goes well with limited resources, and therefore, you do not try to cover the entire market. The niche could be in terms of geography, the niche could be in terms of a type of customer, the niche could be in terms of a type of use, and so on and so forth. So, as you know that, for example, in the phone market, the mobile phone market, the very, very strong position which Nokia had created in a country like India, where they were almost the first mover, because the format with which they came was a killer format, which anyway actually internationally had vanquished the erstwhile market leader, which was Motorola. So, Nokia came and created this with this new format, a huge market in India, but they were kind of blindsided. The growth of Samsung and some of the other makers in this market came from this touch screen and some of the other features with respect to, like say, dual SIM, and they were they lost a significant market share because of some of these tweaking features which the new competitors like Samsung understood were needs strongly felt by the customers and not well exploited by. So, they initially came to the niche strategy for the dual SIM phone, for the touch screen phone, for the more entertainment music oriented phone, and but slowly in the beginning and rapidly after when the strategy was working, this new competitors like Samsung covered the entire market, and we will see that is actually a valid strategy for the follower. Continuing with the first mover strategy, the so called skimming strategy, often followed by semiconductor makers. That means you come up with a leading product, a new product, a kind of a video compression embedded system chip that is kind of very new, provides many advantages to the buyer. Normally this skimming strategy we can see works in professional market or the so called business to business or industrial market, and then the firm may also work to develop new applications for its technology for the next generation. So, if you look at the strategies followed by companies like Intel, you will see that they actually often follow this skimming strategy. They come up with a product at a high price point, people, industrial, professional buyers buy that product because that extra functionality gives an edge to their end product. So, computer makers buy the new Intel chips because of the functionalities provided, even though the price is higher, and then Intel deliberately starts cutting prices, but on the other hand they start adding features here, and therefore on one hand the original product price is going down. Many times they actually kill their own product by introduction of the newer, more powerful product, and that product, like for example the 386 or 486 chips are no longer visible in the personal computer space, but there are variants of 486 which are used in embedded systems on aircrafts, on missiles, or many other defense related equipment. So, that is actually the strategy that is we portray here, that you take add new features, create new applications, and in the meantime in the main marketplace you replace the product with which you have had skimming profit, and this is becomes a valid strategy. Now, if you have actually gone for the mass market penetration strategy, then obviously you have to maximize the number of buyers adopting as quickly as possible with a marketing program that has to be aggressively focused on product awareness, and you have to make it easy for the customers to try the new product. If they try it on the assumption that if they try it they will like it and they will make repeat purchases, or their word of mouth publicity will create a market growth. This has been studied well, that how innovative new products, new services are diffused in the marketplace. So, I will refer you can actually search for the work of E.M. Rogers. Some excellent papers by Rogers are available free of cost on the net, and I will highly recommend that you look at his work, because that will give you a lot of insight into how a first mover or how a pioneer in the market space can actually shape their offering strategy. It will apply to consumer products like shampoo, a new type of shampoo. It will apply to a sophisticated electronic product like a music phone, or it will or a new type of video streaming device. In all cases these rules hold, which Rogers pointed out, this that you need to focus your strategy to create relative advantage. It must be that, and the relative advantage should be very observable, should be very clear. It should not be like very technical, but you should be able to clearly see, oh, this is a very new thing. So, like the touch screen was a relative advantage, and it was very observable on a mobile phone. And it should, however, be compatible. If the touch phone actually created a new type of keyboard or created a very radically different type of customer interface, then it would not have been successful. So, the competitors who came in and to vanquish Nokia, they knew that they have to keep the product compatible with what the customer already knew, the use knowledge that was available in the market. They cannot actually radically depart from that, but they created a very observable relative advantage. And another very important point is that even though at the back end or inside the phone, the touch screen meant a lot of more technical complexity inside the machine, but outside it appeared to be a simplicity, because you didn't need a separate keyboard anymore. You didn't have to press. Maybe the key size became little bigger compared to those small tiny buttons which were available earlier. So, what was inside actually a technical complexity in terms of R&D, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of service and everything, to the customer it appeared like a simplicity, a simplification. So, you see, therefore, relative advantage which is very observable and which appears to customer as delivering simplicity, even though at the back end it may be based on complexity, are fundamental pillars of creating the success of a new product, because this creates the buzz, this creates the word of mouth publicity which is invaluable, and that actually causes which we can even show mathematically, this growth, this from early adopter to the early majority is often created by this so called buzz or the word of mouth or publicity, referral sales that happen, because you tell your friends, you tell your relatives, your children tell you, and that actually creates this market growth. And of course, you will see often in a new product you have this trial packs, or you have demonstrations, or you have booths where you can go and try the product. You have mobile phones. Any new phone will always be available at a display where you can at many distribution outlets, where you can go and pick it up, feel it, press it, try it, and that trialability is again a very important part of this mass market penetration strategy for the first mover, for the pioneer in the marketplace. And of course, there are some other techniques that can be followed. For example, increasing the customer's ability to buy. This was very ably used by Maruti. Maruti, if you many of you might remember, in those days, I think in late 70s, early 80s, when Maruti actually advertised, they showed their car, they talked about a price point which was highly attractive, they created test drive experiences which people immediately appealed to the younger professionals. They could see that this was so lightweight, so easy to drive, so friendly in terms of user interface. It was not chunky, it was not heavy, it did not look like that driver driven almost like a tank type of car. But the really innovative marketing strategy was that they asked for, I think if I remember correctly, some 10,000 rupees or 20,000 rupees of deposit which you wanted to if you wanted to have a Maruti car. People were already at that point of time habituated to wait, because even though those older models were 20-30 year old models, even then you had to wait for 6 months, 1 year to get a car. In those days you had to even wait to get a scooter. And this 10,000 rupees, thousands of people came in and deposited 10,000 rupees to participate in the allotment lottery. Now, this huge sum which Maruti collected, on which they were actually ready to give some interest, created a kitty for them, which they leverage to create a financing scheme, a loan scheme to buy a car through their distribution network, through their tie up with some banks, and this car loan became a huge motivator, because it increased the customer's ability to buy, and this was therefore this is a very valid strategy at the introduction stage for the first mover, for the pioneer. And there are some additional considerations when you are of course pioneering into a global market. So, there will be cultural issues, there will be issues relating to religion, or there could be issues relating to particular conditions. For example, if you are selling a computer in India, then the power supply has to be able to withstand a high fluctuation, and if you want to make the product easy to migrate across the world, you need it to be versatile for 110 volt, 220 volt, 50 hertz, 60 hertz, and thereby actually the computer makers, particularly the mobile computer makers, the laptop makers, the notebook makers, they created the universal power supply, which was impervious to 50 cycles, 60 cycles, or 110 volt, 220 volt, and thereby these are the additional considerations if you are a pioneering global marketeer. But these details we will perhaps discuss in a little bit more depth when you discuss about global marketing strategy, but this is a very important point to understand, that how to increase the customer's ability to buy, and of course, the other issues, relative advantage, which is very observable, which actually presents complexity as simplicity, and this compatibility and trialability. These are fundamental building blocks for a pioneer's mass marketing strategy as a first mover. Now, as opposed to the mass market strategy which we were just discussing, the niche penetration strategy, often used by entrepreneurial first movers, because of the frugal nature or the limited resource driven marketing strategy that is often preferred by an entrepreneur, is obviously based on the understanding that the niche that you are going to address, the segment that you are going to focus on should be immediately attracted to what you are doing, because you do not have the comfort of numbers that okay, if A does not buy, then B will buy, because you are only looking at A1, A2, A3 certain types of buyers in a limited number. So, you have to create a very strong value proposition in terms of either product feature or the use feature, or the kind of business model through which you are proposing. You have to have those advantage if you want to make your niche strategy work, because obviously compared to a mass market strategy, the growth in terms of number of units sold here will be limited, even though actually it is possible to think about a better margin strategy in this particular case, because you can keep your operational costs down, you can keep your marketing cost down, because you can rely more on referral sales, you can rely more on word of mouth publicity, and so on and so forth. This is quite often used in the industrial market, but it has also been used in some sense even in consumer market. So, you could actually create a niche market for a herbal shampoo which is focused on hair growth as opposed to just cleaning your hair or cleaning the dandruff. You can actually kind of make it almost like a medicinal shampoo, and thereby you can create a niche position, or you can create a lice killing hair oil, which is a niche product. Obviously, only people who are being bothered with these insects in their hair, they will be interested, but you have to make it so compelling that people should be able to see that when they use it, and they can see that it's killing the lice, and it is you comb and you see the dead insects coming out of your hair. Not a very pleasant sight, but comforting to the people who were bothered. And so, here the value proposition, the immediacy of the effect, the customers advantage will have to be very rapidly created, very strongly demonstrated, and though these are part of the this frugal niche penetration strategy. And similarly, in the skimming strategy also, where because you are trying to come in with a product at a higher margin, there will be therefore limited number of buyers. We were discussing about the semiconductors. So, you come up with a new device which is very low power consuming and needs therefore a smaller battery, or a battery which can last longer. So, you have to then focus it on not the mass market notebooks, but you have to create a new category called ultra book, and make your product very clearly appealing and giving advantage to the makers of ultra books. So, as a semiconductor maker like Intel, you have to create a position which allows Intel's customers to create a new product with a very strong value proposition, so that while a normal notebook sells for 30,000 rupees, an ultra book can start at 50,000 rupees and can go up to 100,000 rupees plus price point, and this will perhaps be there for some 1 year, 2 years. So, the skimming strategy cannot be a long term strategy. It is a short term, make money, get out, bring in new product, diffuse the product. So, you know that it is something that is go in and come out type of strategy. It was very ably used in the industrial market by companies like DuPont earlier. They used to come in with a new polyester or new polymer based product, creating a new usage for say travel luggage, and or product like Teflon, which has so many important features, giving creating new categories like non-stick cooking ware and so on, and there actually we using your intellectual property rights, creating your patent barrier and other consonant strategies. You sustain your skimming strategy, but knowing that over time you will not be able to retain that price point or retain that market dominance. You will have to actually then gradually have products which are cheaper, faster, better, or can lend itself to a larger market space. As a first mover, as a pioneer, whether you are following the skimming strategy, in case of the skimming strategy is absolutely evident, but even in the mass market strategy, one has to know that you will not be able to retain that dominant market position, because by the very nature of the product life cycle graph that we have often discussed, the nature of that graph shows that as the market is growing, as your volume is growing, more and more people will be attracted to that market. So, that market can only be sustained by the I mean, you can sustain your growth in terms of the number of units sold if only if you actually expand the market itself. So, the first mover to retain growth to be successful also has to play the pioneering role in developing the market itself. So, often you will find the consortium leader for semiconductor makers will be Intel. The consortium leader for personal computers, when they are actually going as an industry body, will be Dell. So, as a first mover with a kind of a new product, a first mover with a kind of a new business model like Dell, you have to know that you will not be able to have that almost monopolistic position and advantage for long. So, you have to therefore strategize that what will be your marketing mix in terms of product, price, promotion, distribution and so on after 6 months, after 1 year, after 1.5 years. So, you have to know that you have to do innovation in terms of your volume build up, in terms of your cost reduction, in terms of your creating new ways for the customer to buy your product. Remember the Maruti example that we just discussed, so that your growth rate is at least equal to the growth rate of the market and preferably better than the market. Otherwise, just remember from the relative velocity, if the market is growing at a rate faster than your growth rate, you are actually, even though you may be growing year upon year, you are actually losing market share. And sometimes the market leader, the first mover, has to be prepared to this gradual erosion of market share, because the original overwhelming position is it is easier to say that retain that, but it is easier said than done. So, what can the market leader, what can the pioneer do to see that they retain that leading position? They are able to grow at least at the rate at which the market is growing. In that, obviously, the main point that we have to look at is what we often say, that we have to move from product leadership to process leadership, and then to the so called customer relationship leadership, and that is the only way you can actually retain new customers, retain current customers, and embrace the late adopters, or what we call the pragmatic majority in the product life cycle. What we call the pragmatic majority in this. So, this chasm which develops, to cross the chasm and be a dominant player in this early majority market, which is the cream of the market, you have to have at this stage, your strategy is based on product features. So, we often call it the product leadership, but at this stage you need to have a process excellence or operational excellence, and you need to have customer intimacy, a lot of relationship expertise, so that you retain your original adopters and as well as embrace the new people coming now into the market. So, for the original adopters who are the innovators, they are looking for bigger, faster, better they are constantly looking for features. So, while trying to satisfy the late adopters, if you neglect your early adopters, the innovative users who gave your initial that 16-17% business, if you ignore them, then these are the people who, like Nokia's customers, might migrate to Samsung and create a new wave. So, while you are actually doing very well with the, like as we can see Nokia now, it is still the dominant marketer in a market like India. They have created many value proposition for the late adopters, the rural buyers, for the less sophisticated buyers, but perhaps they have lost the game with the more sophisticated buyers who were the early innovative buyers. So, you can see from this example of Nokia versus Samsung that you need to have that ability to run with the hound as well as be friendly to the hare, and therefore, you have to keep on innovating to keep your innovative new first time buyer satisfied or early adopter satisfied, as well as create all the trialability, all the clear visible advantages for the late adopters. So, also as we were discussing, as a leader you need to keep the growing the market itself. So, on the whole, the very important point to succeed as a first mover with your marketing strategy is to be able to be flexible with multiple market strategies at the same time, because when you are here, the market is here, there are still something happening here. So, you need to satisfy the innovators, the early adopters, as well as the late adopters or the pragmatic majority at the same time, and these three types of customers need different types of strokes, as they say, different strokes for different folks. So, you need to have this an array of marketing strategy, and you have to have an ensemble of marketing strategies which you should be able to deploy at the same time. This is the reason why in fast moving markets like computers or like say today mobile phones, they have so many different models. You can sometimes wonder, it takes 6 pages on the web to go through all the products that are available from a company like Nokia or Samsung, and they have all these products because they have to simultaneously be endearing, simultaneously be appealing to different types of customers who are innovators, customers who are early adopters, customers who are late adopters or pragmatic majority, and so on and so forth. So, this is a very important, this ability to manage evolving strategies as the market matures is a key requirement of to be successful. And of course, if you are a market leader, as I said, that you have to hold your fort, you have to hold your market share to the extent possible as long as you can by moving at least at the speed at which the market is growing, and you have to yourself because you are the leader, you have to expand the usages. So, that is why today you see all the leaders of mobile computers, they create so many different variants for children, variants for gamers, variants for women, and so that they can expand their appeal. And customer satisfaction and loyalty, customer intimacy as I called it, is a primary requirement. So, that means from product leadership, which is your early stage, you have to be able to simultaneously manage operational excellence so that you can keep your costs down, and customer intimacy so that you can actually create this invaluable asset. This is the key aim of the marketing department today in many different businesses, is to be have the even loyalty is actually, some people criticize that word, because what you need to do is to be a service leader to be intimate, to be dear to the customer. So, it is more about creating not only satisfaction, but delight, and which is the aim of what we call customer intimacy. Because it is only then you can actually encourage repeat purchasing by that customer, by that customer's relatives, children, friends, and so on. Essential to. On the other hand, as a challenger or a follower, you can often bypass. This is an advantage, because as we discussed, you can actually, as a market leader, you have to create ranges, you have to create options which span the whole market. But if you are a chaser, if you are a challenger, and this is what is very nicely explained in the work of Clayton Christensen in his book The Innovator's Dilemma and the follow-up books, and you can actually on YouTube easily enjoy some of the excellent presentation made by Professor Christensen, that how in the steel industry, for example, in US or in many other industries, when the leader ignored the peripheral or the low end of the market, which was less margin, and focused on their major customers, focused on the most revenue, the significant part of their market, the follower created a disruption by winning the lower end of the market, and therefore, they came through a peripheral strategy and then occupied, as Clayton Christensen so nicely has explained, that how the Japanese makers went into the European market with a very low end scooters and motorcycles, but gradually they became so endearing to the customer. At some point of time, the bigger European makers went bankrupt, and slowly the entire market got dominated by this new generation of competitors. So, the challenger's disruptive strategy often starts at the peripheral end, often starts at the low end of the market, and so there are now, as we are wiser, the leader responds with a second brand, or leader expands with responds with a different kind of strategy for market expansion, or using the same technology for creating different types of usages. At the end, of course, there are sometimes no options from the market leader, but to contract or withdraw. But as I said, always refer to the research on market disruptors, and sometimes even though a particular segment is not that remunerative, you have to be careful that giving way or giving away that particular segment may be finally detrimental to your whole business, which you have created as the market leader.